Hi, Professor Tuttle. I'm Andrew Rosen, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the effects of social media and increased usage of social media on adolescent sexual behavior. So first, I'm going to start with why adolescents are in fact at risk of displaying riskier sexual behavior online and increased sexual behavior online through increased social media use. So first of all, as we all know, adolescents lack a sense of maturity. So obviously this puts them at a risk of higher risky sexual behaviors because they may not have as good of a filter as to what to post as a fully mature adult. Second of all, adolescents are very attracted to these different social networking sites. So obviously, by being attracted to these social networking sites, their usage is going to go up. And there is evidence that because this usage is going up, because they are attracted to social networking sites, their risky sexual behavior in fact goes up, and it also encourages risky sexual behavior, this attraction to the social networking sites. And I'll explain why. Self-expression and validation are critical aspects and factors for adolescents. And social networking sites give them a platform to express themselves and be validated by peers. So this obviously translates into risky sexual behavior, which I'll explain a little bit later as to why. Now, adolescents are also more likely to share personal details and private information on social networking sites. So obviously, as the usage goes up, there's a higher prevalence that they'll share, risky sexual material and private details. And also there's less parental monitoring on social networking sites than in real life. So, obviously the parents aren't being able to monitor what they're doing on social networking sites. So as they're using it more, then obviously they realize that they can have a little bit more freedom and kind of post what they want and put down what they want, which, obviously can turn into risky sexual behavior. And a last important point is that there's a false sense of privacy, which obviously, can correlate to riskier sexual behavior because they think what they're sharing might in fact be private when it isn't. So I'm just going to talk about social media content that is prevalent to sharing, more riskier sexual content and having riskier sexual behavior online. And so this kind of goes back to one of the previous points I made, this first bullet here, as to why the necessity for self-expression and validation are a factor in risky sexual behavior. And that's because friends and likes determine popularity on social networking sites. So obviously, this encourages adolescents to fight for friends and likes and seek that self-validation and seek the idea of expressing themselves to more friends and getting more likes. So obviously, they're going to be displaying bolder and riskier behavior to get rewarded by friends and likes. And, this is evidenced by the fact that about 54% of social networking sites that belong to adolescents had one or more reference to just not risky sexual behavior, but to risky behavior in general, which includes sexual activity, substance abuse, and violence. Now, 24% of profiles, which is included in the 54%, but also included in the overall number, included in the overall number. 24% of those profiles had references to sexual behavior, and particularly risky sexual behavior. So that's critical to note, and that is kind of evidencing that, they're really fighting for these friends and likes by displaying risky sexual behavior. Now, another important thing to note is that sexting has become very prevalent today through the increase of the ability to send as many texts as you want to your friends. And what's really important to note is that 20% of adolescents have sent semi-nude or nude photos to other adolescents. 28% have received sexts, and 57% have been asked to sext. So obviously, this is a really risky sexual behavior, and obviously the increase of text messaging is increasing this risky sexual behavior. Now, one little thing I want to talk about that's really important is the disparities in usage and also the disparities in sexual behavior between different ethnic groups of adolescents. So Latino adolescents are at higher risk of effectively displaying risky sexual behavior. And this could be due to cultural or disagreements with parents, could be, due to a myriad of factors. And Latino adolescents are actually at higher risk of contracting the STIs. There are higher rates of STIs among Latino adolescents. And Latino adolescents are more likely not use condom or birth control compared to Caucasian and African adolescents. I know that says you should say adolescents. And what's also important to note is that Latino adolescents are more likely to extensively use social media compared to Caucasian and African American adolescents. So, the social scientists that wrote the articles that I was reading through, surmised very intelligently that the more risky sexual behavior that Latino adolescents are displaying, combined with the more extensive use of social media, probably this will mean that there's an uptick of risky sexual behavior by Latino adolescents on social networking sites, which is really important to note because there can be campaigns that are launched in order to educate different ethnic groups on the particular Latino adolescents on the dangers of risky sexual behavior on social media sites. I'm going to run through some conclusions that were reached by a couple of different articles I read. And one important conclusion is that there is a notable positive association between an increase in risky sexual behavior and high frequency texting. So obviously the more that you're texting and using that social media medium or social network of texting, the more likelihood that you're going to be displaying risky sexual behavior through those texts. And it was found in Latino communities, when it is talking about texting, that parental monitoring is actually linked to a delay in sexual intercourse among Latino adolescents. Now, it was also found in another article, a very strong conclusion that the increase of social media networks, social networking sites by adolescents does in fact, correlate to an increase in risky sexual behavior online for a lot of the reasons I, talked about before in terms of why they display a riskier sexual behavior. And so I talked to a family friend of ours, Dr. Sharon Greenberg, who is a psychologist in the Bay Area. And she found that there was a definite positive correlation between increased social media use and risky sexual behavior. So it was definitely validated. And she thought this because young girls, particularly adolescents, are into posting what they're wearing, and they have to, put themselves out there in a seductive way for attention, which I kind of talked about, which I touched on before. And she also has found treating patients with sexual abuse and trauma that abuse and trauma will lead to more promiscuous behavior in real life as well as social media. And so she also obviously, why this is important for development. I talked to her about why this is important for development, and obviously risky sexual behavior can lead to attachment issues, riskier sexual behavior can lead to anxious, insecure attachments, which we've talked about before. And, this means that adolescents could have a harder time trusting other partners, not only when they're an adolescent, but also in emerging adulthood. And now what she also talked about is that insecure attachment to parents, she has found tends to be correlated with riskier sexual behavior online in adolescents. And this is because she explained that she thought, they were used to trying to get attention from their parents. And so then this translates into trying to get attention on social media sites. And so then I'm going to really quickly talk about why this is important, because obviously this puts, there's a high potential of cost of risky sexual behavior, which can lead to a myriad of issues, including higher risk for STI infections, higher risk of teen pregnancies, a lower risk of first sexual experience, which leads to all those things. And, there's also possible legal ramifications because, there have been cases where adolescents are prosecuted for trafficking, effectively trafficking pornography through social networking sites, because a lot of the subjects are underage. Now, there's some really important recommendations. One important recommendation is that there needs to be an increase in parental monitoring on social media sites in order to curb risky sexual behavior. It's shown that when parents are monitoring their child more, then obviously there's less risky sexual behavior on social media sites. And what's included in this is limiting screen time so they have less of an opportunity to partake in risky sexual behavior online because their usage will be going down. Another important part is comprehensive sex education, teaching adolescents about condoms, STIs, how to protect themselves in sex, the danger of risky sexual behavior online, obviously can educate them and lead to a reduction of sexual behavior, risky sexual behavior, not only online, but, in real life. And then Dr. Greenberg, who I talked to, said a really important part of, reducing the risky sexual behavior that you're displaying in real life and online for adolescents is developing a really secure attachment and close relationship with your therapist to, develop, to help, effectively curb the idea that they're trying to look for attention through insecure attachments. And she did say it was harder for lower socioeconomic populations to follow through on treatment just because they had less access, which obviously she was very disappointed by. I know I went a little bit over. I just was really excited about the subject, so I went on a very deep dive, a little bit about a minute and a half late. I hope that's okay. I really appreciated presenting to you today. If you have any questions, just obviously let me know.